Well, everybody, welcome. On behalf of the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research here at Georgia State University, I'd like to welcome you to the 7th Annual World Languages Week. CULTR, as the center is known, is one of 16 federally funded Title VI language resource centers in the United States. CULTR has, over the years, created a unique identity around serving the needs of all students in the communities they represent by helping to promote language learning opportunities as part of 21st century global education. CULTR is guided by its core values of access, advocacy, outreach, and research, and has gained a national reputation for innovative approaches to promoting access to language education for all students, regardless of their socioeconomic and ethnic background. My name is Dr. Tim Janse. I currently serve as finance officer, assistant finance officer at Georgia State University's College of Arts and Sciences. And I'd like to thank you for being here with us today for the IT and Global Business panel, which I will be moderating. I'm very excited about this. We have a fantastic set of panelists with a wealth of information. I think you have an opportunity to learn from all of them. So before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to address just a couple of housekeeping and technical issues or questions you may have. First, I'd like to remind everyone that all the panels this week are being recorded and will be available after the event. All attendees will remain muted throughout the entire session. If for some reason your connection is interrupted during the panel discussion, simply just rejoin the session with the same link that you used previously. Our panel discussion will be about 35 to 40 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A with you, our attendees. The students may submit questions throughout the course of the discussion and after, of course, in the Q&A box by clicking on that icon at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon that says Q&A, so please use that one. If you like any of the questions that others have asked, or it's something similar to what you were going to ask, just click on the little thumbs up icon to promote this question to the top of the list, which is great because this way we know which questions are the most important to you. This panel session will conclude at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm saying that because we have some people coming in and calling in from all over the world today, actually. So let's meet our panelists. I'm going to just mention them in alphabetical order. The first one is Tanya Balakovic. She's a project manager at NCR. Then we have Jeff Ritter, who's a custom solutions manager at SkyTeam Delta. Then we have Kimberly Spears, who's a senior manager at Deloitte, and Desev Weems, who's a deposit product manager at Truist Bank. So I'm not going to read lengthy bios because I don't think that is terribly interesting to you probably. So what I would like to do is actually just turn it over to our panelists and give them a chance to introduce themselves. So Tanya, would you like to start? Just kind of talk a little bit about.
Of course. Thank you so much for introducing us and for doing that wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me and inviting me to be part of the panel. So I am originally from Serbia, so I speak Serbian language, and I started being interested in Spanish language when I was in high school. It kind of started in Serbia. I was watching Spanish soap operas and reading the subtitles in Serbian. So without knowing, I was actually picking up the language. And when we moved to the United States, I realized that I was able to understand it. I just wasn't able to speak it. So I started taking classes in high school and noticed my love for languages and other cultures. So I finished all my degrees at Georgia State. So I majored in Spanish, minored in French, and then I also went to do master's in Spanish at Georgia State. I also was part of the translation program at Georgia State. So all my education was completed at Georgia State. Loved every minute of it, enjoyed all the professors, all the classes, had a great experience. And I would always recommend Georgia State to everyone if they want to go study, because it's very international. It's very culturally, they accept all cultures. And I just felt like I belonged there. While studying my master's, I was also teaching classes, lower level Spanish classes, 1000 and 2000 level, which I enjoyed immensely. And I tried teaching in high school and realized that was not for me. So I was lucky enough to be offered a job in the business world or in the corporate world. So I worked as an international account manager for several years and represented or worked with accounts that represented 89 territories worldwide. So that gave me great exposure to international business, the way things worked when it comes to the government and specific documentation and everything that goes on. So I was able to really use my Spanish and cultural skills to get closer to my customers and accounts. And right now, my current job position is, as you mentioned, project manager at NCR. So it's a completely different world. It's more IT related. I don't necessarily use my Spanish right now. However, I use my Serbian since NCR has opened Second World headquarters in Serbia, in Belgrade. So most of our team, or the team that I work for, actually is in Serbia. So I get to use that part of my culture and language now. So it's really been beneficial for me to know several languages and to be more culturally educated. So that's it. That's, you know, a little summary. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Kimberly, let's just do ladies first today. Would you like to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure, and also excited to be here and speak to everyone. My name is Kimberly Spears. I grew up in Mississippi, and if anyone's been to Mississippi, it's not the international hub of the US, but it's, you know, I had a great upbringing. But in high school, that's when we first started learning foreign languages. And I actually picked German because it was the first year it was being offered in my high school. And my parents were not forcing me to take Latin. So I had choice. And I will say that the most inspiring thing that happened to me is that I applied for a scholarship and spent my junior year of high school in Germany as an exchange student. So think about coming from Mississippi to a very small town in Germany, 3 kilometers from Denmark. And I was quite honestly the only Black person in town. So a huge shift in culture, but it was an amazing time for me. I really realized how there's more similarities than differences when you're living in a different country. And it really inspired me to go out of school for state and explore business in terms of my career. So I actually minored in German in college, and I did a couple of internships. What's interesting around that, one was FX trading in New York. So even though it was around foreign exchange trading, we all spoke English at the trading floor. Another one was with a major bank in Frankfurt, Germany. However, it was a hub for Central Asia, Africa, and I had a managing director from in Amsterdam. So even though it was a multinational office in Germany, we spoke English in the office. So you'll be surprised, even though you're learning another language, you can also use those skills in terms of how you communicate. Those don't directly require you to speak in the language. So I actually went to Harvard to get my MBA. And what was great about that experience, a third of our class is international. So if you're thinking about business and how you approach problems from different points of views, we had all of those perspectives and cultural experience in the classroom to look at a similar case, but all have a different solution based on our own experiences. So since business school, I've worked at Deloitte. I'm based here in the Atlanta office. And I've actually had a number of different roles there. I've done some things with strategy consulting. I've led some of our diversity, equity, inclusion experiences. I've managed leadership development programs. And now I'll launch new experiences for our clients and clients' growths and markets. And you might wonder, okay, you got your MBA, you did like 5 or 6 things at Deloitte. How does this all add up? But quite honestly, putting yourself in new environments, adapting to the environment, work with new teams to innovate and solve problems, that's really what a lot of my language learning prepared me for, to be able to relate and adapt cross-culturally. Now, I will say I have not been quite as successful in learning Japanese, which I'm learning more for personal reasons. My sister-in-law is Japanese, and I wanted to take a sabbatical and really not just go to the large cities, but go a little bit off the beaten path where it's more helpful to know the local language to communicate and get around. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it over to the next person.
Wonderful, Kimberly. You've given me two wonderful segues actually here. The first one is Japanese. I've started learning it a little bit. I went to Japan 2 years ago on the way back from China and had just a marvelous time, but I'm still kind of got stuck on just even trying to read the kana, let alone the kanji, but that's a completely different story. The other segue actually is you mentioned that you have been working with people in Amsterdam, and actually Jeff is joining us from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where he and I actually had a chance to meet. He and I have known each other for many years, and we actually had a wonderful dinner there about 4 weeks ago. So Jeff, I'm going to take it over to you, and please just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about how you got to where you are. And you're muted.
Yeah, so thanks. So I'm Jeff Ritter, and I come from Ohio, and I was interested in language early on. And when I was about 10 years old, my family took a trip to Germany. First trip to Europe as an American, never been outside America, etc. And my father suggested we learn some German before we went. And I remember the first time I heard my first word in German in his car, and it was "Ich möchte," I would like to. And that sound, that difference, that there was dots over the O, that made me so intrigued in other languages and cultures, because in America, you're deprived of other cultures, I think, a lot of times. And that led me to years of literally self-teaching myself German, heads down, headphones in, books, writing, etc. And that led me to a career in German teaching. And by that means, I then became a German professor at Georgia State, where I met Tim. And in Atlanta, then became a German-speaking agent at the Atlanta airport. And by that skill, being hired by Delta to work in the airport, that led me to a career in aviation that I never would have dreamed of had I not had German as a background. Working for Delta has been an amazing experience. As a German speaker, I got my foot in the door with Delta, and that led me to then promotions and promotions and promotions, to being a corporate executive at Delta, to having postings in Atlanta, London, now Amsterdam. And without German, and without my father recommending learn some German before we go to Munich, I never would have been where I am now. And I owe my language background and my father's intuition to say, hey, why don't you learn this? To where I am now with an executive at Delta and then at SkyTeam, working with cultures and airlines all over the world. And it's been a great experience. And it's all related to my language learning as a child. So.
Wow, the power of parents
and
others.
Yep.
It's amazing how a small experience, a small decision can really impact your life, right?
Yeah, like one word led me to an entire career of learning German. Wonderful. Which led to experiences and yeah, abroad. So, yep.
Thank you, Jeff. Fantastic. Yep. Okay, Desef. Last but certainly not least.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Desef Weems. I am a deposit product manager at SunTrust, now Truist Bank. And I think I need to pick up where Jeff left off. I think parents are definitely the key in my story also. They always encourage me to explore different cultures and just always be open-minded. And my language and cross-cultural relations journey really kicked off seriously at North Atlanta High School here in Atlanta, Georgia. I was in the IB program at North Atlanta, so the International Baccalaureate program, where I studied both Spanish and Arabic. And after graduating from North Atlanta, I attended Furman University. And at Furman, I studied Spanish and business. And while at Furman, I had an opportunity to do a study abroad. I went to Cuernavaca, Mexico. Absolutely loved it. Stayed with a host family, attended classes at the university in Cuernavaca, got a chance to tour throughout Mexico, went to Puebla and Tasco and the capital city, Mexico City. And I just had a lot of fun. And so when I came back, finally graduated from Furman, I got into a program that was sponsored by the Spanish Embassy for Science and Education. And it was the first year they had this program for Americans and Canadians. And so we were placed through, different regions and cities throughout Spain. And I was placed in Andalusia, in Seville. And I was an assistant language teacher at elementary and high school, and just had a blast. Loved Spain, got a chance to learn so much, meet people from around the world. And after Spain, I actually went to business school in England. I went to the University of Derby, which is right smack dab in the middle of England, right near Nottingham. You guys may be familiar with Nottingham because of Robin Hood. So I was right near Nottingham, and I did marketing management while in business school. That was my focus. And I had classmates from all over the world, from China to Zimbabwe to France, and I really got a chance to know them, share ideas, and there was a meeting of minds, and I really enjoyed my experience there. And after leaving England, I came back to the US. I came back to Atlanta, worked in the Spanish and Portuguese department at Emory University as an administrator for the undergrad program. After a few years of that, I joined Capgemini IT Consulting, which is a French-based company. And a few years ago, I shifted into banking. And so now, as I said earlier, I am at SunTrust, now Truist Bank, as a deposit product manager, and really enjoying it. I think more than anything, cross-cultural relations have aided in my career by ultimately giving me more freedom. It gave me more freedom, and it didn't limit my skill set, not socially, not racially, not in a national box. I wasn't confined. And so I was able to collaborate with people who didn't start off their lives where I started out mine. I was able to work across various fields, higher ed, IT consulting, and now banking, and really work with people to build trust, to help them understand where I'm coming from, and to help figure out where they're coming from. And it just allowed me to be dynamic and pivot when necessary. So in summary, that's my journey, and it allowed me to have more freedom in my life.
Thank you, Dasef. I think this was a wonderful summary, I think also, and kind of wrap things up nicely. There's a few takeaways that I took from your introductions. And I think this is important especially for our student audience to understand. When you study languages, of course, you study other cultures. You also develop an understanding of different perspectives, different ways of thinking, how the world can work in ways that are not typical for us, right? In whichever country we're in. Of course, many of our audience here come from the US, but we always are kind of set in the ways that we think based on the society and the culture that we grew up in. And really, when you study languages and cultures, you can really do just about anything with it. A lot of times there is this misperception that people say, well, I don't want to be a language teacher. Well, you don't have to be a language teacher. Like Jeff was a language teacher. Dasef, you were a language teacher also, and Tanya, you also taught, that, but that's not your career, right? You can do a bunch of different things. But I'd like to kind of get back to something that Kimberly and Dasef just said. And that is that Kimberly, you worked in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Dasef, you said that your language and cultural experiences really have helped you overcome maybe some obstacles you would otherwise have had in certain ways. And maybe we can talk about that, because a lot of times students say, well, a certain language is not for me, right? Because it's the people who speak the language don't look like me or don't act like me or whatever. And I think it really shows you that languages allow you to kind of bridge this gap, even though the gap is just in your head, potentially. So Kimberly, maybe I can ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit on the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion access piece of your professional experience, and how the languages and cultures kind of factored into that.
And yeah, that's a good setup, because part of it is we all credit our parents to some extent, but I grew up in an environment that focused on education and curiosity, encourage you to be who you are no matter what's around you. And so the fact that I was curious, even though I was uncomfortable, was opening the door for me to have conversations and to learn about others. And what I learned, and it was great that I had that experience at 16 before I was in the professional environment, if you really take the time to listen and get to know people, you can find at least one or two things you have in common. And so quite honestly, having come to a corporate professional environment and also doing some work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm also sometimes the only person of a number of different things. I could be the only woman. I could be the only person of color. I can be the only person from Mississippi. There's something that I'm always the only of, but that's not how I interact with others. So I always approach it with learning and having that mindset that you have experiences that I can learn from, and I want to get to know you. And the same is true about me. And so I would just encourage you, if you're having that hesitation of, what if I go in the room? No one knows me. Just find that one person and just start talking to them and find out something that you both have in common and go further with that. And I believe my learning the languages and being exposed to the different environments just help me understand I won't have all the answers. I just have to ask questions to find out more.
Excellent. Tanya, since you kind of come at it from maybe a little different perspective, right? Since you were not born in the US, and neither was I, by the way, I'm originally from Germany. So of course, there's always a kind of a cultural transition, and to some extent, having access and being included is also something that I think it's interesting to consider when you're not from the majority culture, right? Tanya, what's been your experience in terms of how your intercultural competence and languages really helped you feel more included in the environment that you're been working in?
There we go. I unmuted myself. So I think I would have to agree with Kimberly on specific aspects where I've always been very open as to where I come from, very prideful of my country, my native country, my language, and making sure that people knew where I come from and what my background was. And in talking to multiple people, like Kimberly said, there's always gonna be a difference. We're not all equal, right? I mean, we all have our own identity, I guess, right? And but talking to different people, having those connections and honest conversations, looking at other individuals as human beings and not necessarily seeing these minor differences that we have, you actually realize that we're all very similar, that we've all as people or as a community have gone through probably the same problems, the same struggles, and you build relationships that way. So that has been my kind of experience, especially coming to the United States at the beginning, because I didn't speak English. I was actually more interested in Spanish, and in my classes, I was talking to kids in Spanish, and I connected with them better because they were also foreign, and you have that foreign mentality in a sense. So it took me a little while to really understand the American culture and the way the United States worked as a country. But now I think just in general, being open-minded, being able to listen to other people really and understand where they come from and what they've gone through and what their struggles are and what their goals are, you kind of realize that you can learn from their experiences. You also realize that we're actually way more similar and closer to each other. And you develop friendships that way, way closer friendships than anything else. So I think that's very important. And instead of focusing on what our differences are, right? So that's been kind of my experience. And I have to say, it's helped me build relationships, and not just in the workspace and, with different customers and different, companies, but on a personal level as well.
Thank you, Tana. Really insightful. I think, one of the common themes that is really popping up is that language intercultural learning really allows you to discover a shared human experience, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with it, if you ever watched, speaking of learning Japanese, I love watching NHK World, and they have this wonderful series that's called Somewhere Street, where somebody basically, I guess a camera team kind of walks through the streets of some city somewhere in the world, some really exotic ones. And what strikes me so often is that the things that the people care about and talk about and are concerned with, are working on, are getting ready for, are very common things: taking the kids to school, worrying about somebody who might be sick in the house, putting food on the table, going to work, trying to stay healthy, a lot of these things. And I think for me that just tells you that what we do as language and cultural professionals really allows us to bridge and understand a lot of these, what we may consider to be differences, but really they aren't. Jeff, I'd like to ask you, since you've been working at Delta and SkyTeam, I know that Delta, being the hometown airline here in Atlanta, is known for its diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, and really makes a big thing out of it. And rightfully so, of course. What has your experience in that particular field been? Maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Of course, yeah. I think so. Delta is obviously Atlanta's hometown airline, but they rely on partners around the world to connect passengers to places they can't serve directly, right? So imagine if you're going to Nuremberg. Atlanta, Nuremberg can't happen, right? So they rely on partners, and when customers connect to partner airlines, they're subject to those partner airlines' culture, regulations, policies, et cetera. And Delta has spent a lot of time trying to work with partners to align their policies to be the most beneficial for both Americans, Germans, Australians, et cetera, to make the customer journey be as successful as possible. And what I think Delta's done well is Delta has put people in partner airline locations. I was in London for 2 years with Virgin Atlantic, now in Amsterdam with KLM. And they've really tried to understand the other partners' mentality, their structure, their organization, so that when customers transfer between Delta and a partner, that the customer experience is what they expect. And I think Delta's focused on that very well. And I think there's a lot more to be done. But I think that Delta and all the airlines have a common goal to make the experience go well. It's Delta's influence on partners to bring our goals to them, and also to hear from them their goals to us, to align on what should be prioritized for business purposes. And if Delta's policy or vision doesn't match China Easterns or Koreans, we learn from them, and we can manage our expectations, and we can adapt our policies to meet halfway. And I think Delta's done a great job of doing that. And I think that within SkyTeam, managing 19 airlines, you have 19 cultures, languages, et cetera, who need assistance from one central hub. And that's been a challenge because you have 19 cultures who come together who need to be guided by one central organization. And having linguistic and cultural knowledge, I can't speak, I can't speak Italian or Korean or Japanese or Chinese, but having learned languages, I can know the challenges they would have in a meeting in English, and adapt my meeting policies and the way that I speak and presentations to adapt to their needs to succeed.
So really what you're doing is you're translating, right? You're translating not only in terms of language, but also in terms of culture. You have to understand the different perspectives, priorities. My experience has been corporate training primarily between Germany and the US. And I think it's tricky sometimes when you have cultures that are always perceived to be so similar, but they're not. Right, so the Germans always have the tendency to come over here and they say, "Oh, we are all the same, and yeah, we understand each other." And then all of a sudden, things go south. I'd like to ask you a little bit of what your experience has been, especially international banking, in terms of bridging these differences.
Well, you just touched on a point that I wanted to mention. It's a little bit unconventional because when we think of languages and cultures, we usually think of someone or something that's outside of the U.S. here in the U.S. But last year, during the Black Lives Matter protest at Truist, we had many days of understanding sessions. We had DEI sessions, diversity, equity, inclusion sessions, where we engaged in dialogue on topics of systemic racism currently and historically. And it was a very interesting, peculiar feeling when someone can be from your home country or from your region or from your state and actually have had a different lived experience than you. And so what I found is that in many ways, the skill set that I learned when I was abroad in different countries, I used it here in the US for Americans who may not have grown up like I grew up. And so, you know, we spent hours talking to each other about George Floyd and racial inequity, and we just kind of build awareness together, shared our stories, and you know, there was a comparative framework there that we could work with. So, you know, sometimes we think of over there when we think about, you know, language and cultures, but sometimes that same skill set can be applied right here.
Dasev, I think this is an extremely important point that you're bringing up, because again, we're always thinking about international in the sense of national borders, right? But I think there are lots of nations or tribes or groups or different circles of value that we're encountering every day, whether it's our neighbors who just have a completely different lived experience, as you said, or somebody who comes from another country. Georgia State is currently hosting the Diversity Abroad, or will be next week, actually, Diversity Abroad conference. It's an international conference, and I'm going to present a session on a framework that I developed. Doesn't matter, but one of the things that we do in this particular session, we also try to question what international means. And one of my co-author actually has done a lot of research on bringing indigenous communities in. She lives in the West, she lives in Montana, and you're talking about cultural differences and about different nations, right? Because there are indigenous nations, you kind of bring them into the fray. And I think the idea of language learning and cultural learning allows us to better approach those groups as well, right? So I think this is, it's an extremely important thing to understand, because a lot of times people are asked, well, why do you learn this language? Well, there's a lot more to it than just, you know, being able to communicate.
Tim, can I give one more quick example of language and business?
Please, absolutely, Jeff. I was actually going to ask about example.
So when I moved to the Netherlands, my Dutch was okay, not conversational, but I could understand it and whatever. But living in the Netherlands, SkyTeam's headquarters is here in Amsterdam, also is KLM's, and the Dutch culture has a high proficiency in English, more so than all the other 19 airlines I work with. So they are very vocal, they're very outspoken, and they try to, it's also their home turf, right? So they're in the Netherlands, SkyTeam is in the Netherlands, but they're one of 19 members, and they try to lead discussions for SkyTeam toward their goals, because they are the kind of the home carrier of the Netherlands. And so in meetings, I found that the Dutch representatives from KLM for SkyTeam would often try to, their English was so good that they could just override and lead discussions. And I had to really work with them to allow for them to take time to think and to stop, to allow for Korean, for Chinese, for, you know, Indonesians to respond. And after about a few weeks, my Dutch was conversational, and I called my colleague at KLM and she said, hey, Jeff, good morning. And I said, in Dutch, hi, good morning, in a colloquial way. And she said, wait, you speak Dutch? And we built a set of trust there. And so she said, you're not just an American who moved to the Netherlands from Delta who tries to tell us what to do. KLM is a very prestigious brand in the Netherlands. And by speaking Dutch with her, she slowly began to trust me. And with that trust, she then stopped derailing meetings for their interest and trusted me to include all 19 member airlines to come to a decision. And it was that cultural awareness and that needing to know that all 19 member airlines had opinions, but they couldn't vocalize them as quickly as KLM could. And that decision and that learning of Dutch allowed me to connect with her and to explain to her why we need a little bit more time and you can't just derail meetings. And she, after that discussion, we built trust, and she became less vocal and less negative and more willing to work with Delta and SkyTeam as a whole. So
I think that's a very, very good point you're making there, Jeff. Because a lot of what we're talking about is building connections, talking to people, developing relationships. And trust is, of course, at the very foundation of building a good relationship. Kimberly, could you maybe see how trust maybe has impacted, especially like intercultural trust in a wider sense, has maybe impacted your ability to do business, to work on projects? And Tanya and Dasef, I'd like for you to address that question as well.
So it was interesting. I started my career at Deloitte in the consulting practice, which is much more project-based. And a lot of times, for those of you who don't know what professional services is, we don't have a product we're selling. We're really our people are our assets. So we bring the best thinking, we bring innovation, and we're problem solvers. And so when clients hire us for projects, that's what they want to see. And so the business is very relationship based. You know, they have a problem they need you to solve. They're expecting you to bring your best to do it. And you can't build that. It kind of builds off of what Jeff was saying without trust. And so that requires a lot of sessions, a lot of working groups where you really are listening to hear what they're saying, but not assuming that you heard it. Play it back. And so what I found that made a lot of these project working relationships successful is that it's not just operating a meeting, coming out of the meeting, spitting something back, but make it an iterative process where, you know, this is what we think we heard. Does this resonate with you? Like, play it back. And so it becomes more of an exchange, and it really creates this culture of collaboration that, okay, you're hearing me, you may not get it right the first time, but let's continue to discuss it. I think also what happens in that culture of trust you're building as you're having those conversations is that it makes the difficult things easier to say, because no one wants to really say, oh, you're wrong, you know, that solution will not work. So you kind of build up to, or here are the reasons why, and have you thought about it this way? And so I really think you're really setting up the foundation that we're in this together. We want the best outcome. Sometimes what we're suggesting, if you look at it a different way, it may allow you to put in a better solution that in the end, really, you want to see results and you want to see impact. Because with every project that we're doing, there has to be an impact to how the business is operating so they can justify their return on investment that they're making.
Excellent. Thank you. Tanya?
Yes, of course. So for me personally, where I really used my international or cultural skills in Spanish was when I worked as an international account manager, and my Spanish really helped me with the Mexico, Central and South America territories, and being able to communicate and speak in Spanish, and they were able to explain what they needed as a customer, as a client, what their needs were, what the market was like, right? So understanding, because I've seen lots of executive leaders go into specific countries or markets and talk to distributors or clients, but talk to them from a United States perspective, business perspective. And that doesn't necessarily always transition well, because we do things a specific way here in the United States. You have a set of rules and, you know, we follow protocol, but that necessarily doesn't work in countries like, let's say, Venezuela or Argentina or Israel, Middle East. So they have their specific ordinances, guidelines, documentation, stuff that's being imposed by the government that you have to understand and you have to follow. So if you want to build relationships with these countries and continue having these distributors and clients, you got to be able to understand what they need in order to import and export product, what documentation is needed, how the market works, what their needs are, right, as a client, what the product that they were buying was a medical device. So there was a lot of documentation that went into it for the customs, for the borders. So all of that, really, I needed to be open culturally and understand what they needed, so I would provide the best service as their representative and understand how I can assist them better, and that way also assist me in growing my sales and growing my accounts and being able to build that trust that Jeff was talking about with the clients. And when you're first point of contact, they come to you, so you also end up being their therapist in a way, dealing with their problems and trying to understand what they need. But there's lots of cultural differences, even with NCR. When they opened the offices in Serbia, United States or team here is used to working a specific way, and the way they treat customers and the way they talk. So when they started employing people in Serbia, Serbian people are very direct and may even sound slightly arrogant or standoffish, but that's not necessarily it. They're just very direct. So I had to explain and kind of build that relationship with the teams here and the teams that we were working with in Serbia to kind of not smooth things out, but explain to my Serbian people and my team here the way we both function, right? So now after several years of working together, you see that the trust has been built there as well, whereas it's not necessarily, there isn't so much like cultural clash. Now they understand better how each one works and that they can trust each other. And actually we're here working as a team to try to help NCR and finish the projects and working for a common greater good for the corporation. So that's kind of been my experience when it comes to using language and cultural skills. But I think just in general, being open-minded, listening to what again, it all revolves around that, listening to what the client wants and what the client needs, doing research, what other markets and countries are like, right, is crucial if you want to grow the business, especially international business. And today, in today's society, everything is global. The world, the business is global. You can't really function just being closed in United States or closed in one country. So you have to expand your horizons if you want to grow.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. These are wonderful quotes. You can just pull those out and kind of make little clips, right? And use them to motivate your language learners. Desef.
Yeah, so I think I want to pick up where Tanya just left off. I think keywords were being open, learning. I think we're we're lifetime learners. You don't ever really feel like you know everything. I think that's a fatal mistake. And so I think having no assumptions is important. Always asking questions, and then not thinking that a business model that works in the U.S. will work in Spain, for example. I remember coming home from teaching classes at the high school and being like starving. I was starving. I really wanted something to eat, and the time period was a siesta. And so a lot of things shut down during that time period. And so that was, my first, concrete, example of an assumption not working for me in a certain country. You can't assume that, I can create a business that's going to be 24/7 when there is a cultural time period in which there's a lull in work and there's a, focus on family and relaxation. So that was very important for me. And also I recall a story from college. Marketing professor told us about a car company that wanted to sell a car in a Spanish-speaking country in South America. And they named the car, you guys may have heard this story, a Nova. And Nova, in Spanish, who's going to buy a car that doesn't go and doesn't work? And so, as Tanya said, you got to do your research. You have to not make assumptions, and you really have to learn about the history and the politics and the food of the country that you're in, or the demographic that you're targeting. I know a lot of companies, they want to grow their customer base, and so I'm sure some of the audience members here on this call, their teachers have told them that translation isn't just about recalling the word. It's also about understanding the culture. It's about understanding the food and the architecture. I remember learning Arabic and learning about certain countries having 2 kitchens. I remember learning about halal versus kosher food. I remember learning about homes that were built with courtyards And so all of these things are important when you're trying to market your business in a certain country. And I believe that clientele can feel when you're being authentic and real, and that sweet spot between representing your company, your organization, and carrying out that purpose and meeting the people where they are. It's a very important sweet spot to try to hit.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, appreciate it. So I'm just looking at the Q&A. We've had a couple of just really, really great questions coming in. And one of the things that you've kind of just addressed, Nassef, is that that communicating and building relationships and so forth goes way beyond just the language part of things. It was one question, and maybe if y'all can maybe just keep your answers really relatively short, because we only have so many minutes left now. There's one, it's like, what are some ways that those who may not have strong world language skills can take steps toward bridging intercultural gaps? And what I hear is that a lot of times it just has to do with understanding the other culture and just being aware. Is that, would you say, summarize that?
Tim, can I jump in? I think it's comparing versus acceptance. When you come from America or any other country, and you live in another country, you constantly compare your background, your language with the other culture. And once you stop comparing and accept the culture is different, then you begin to integrate. And I think the acceptance of the culture, when you forget about comparing, is the key to integrating into a society. There are a number of things in Germany and Netherlands that I've had that I thought were weird at first, but now I think they're normal and this is what it is, and I have to accept it. And once you accept that and stop comparing, then you open yourself up to integrating and to being a part of the society.
Yeah, I would also like to add, I think one of the key things, me also being a foreign person in the United States, one of the key things is also not seeing yourself as superior to any other cultural or country, and not seeing yourself as inferior either, right? So loving who you are and what your background is, but at the same time respecting another person and their background and where they come from. I think that's one of the key things to really being open and listening to other human beings. And just by that, you're bridging that gap, right?
Yep.
And people just, you see the appreciation when you talk to somebody else and you ask questions and you're interested in their culture, in their language, and in participating in their events, you see the appreciation. They will appreciate you way more than if you were just standoffish somewhere in a corner, like, oh, I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I think, respecting yourself, your people, and then respecting other people and other cultures and countries is one of the key things.
And I think that other people in other cultures are proud or happy when others from a dominant language like English move to a country where their language is maybe not dominant in the world. And they're like, do you speak German? Do you speak Dutch? Like, why? Oh my gosh, wow. And that makes them open to you a little bit more to connect with you, to talk with you, and to trust you. And so I think those things lead to cultural appreciation and integration more than just learning the vocabulary. It's the fact that you've studied them, that you appreciate them, and that you want to integrate with them in their own language and culture.
And I think also showing respect, right? Respect is always something that really leads to us. I have one tiny little anecdote many years ago in the mid-90s, when I guess many of our attendees weren't even born. I went to Thailand on my way to Australia, and in Thailand, so I was told, is when you are at a temple and there are praying monks, your head should not be above theirs. You should not be towering over them. You should be, lower. And so, whether or not that's true, I'm 6'2". So you can imagine that when I was there, it's like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So I basically just kind of crawled almost. But there was this one elderly lady at one of the temples in Bangkok, and I exited the temple. She came to me and was just loving it. I mean, she was just talking to me. She didn't speak a word of English or German or whatever. I have no idea what she said, but she was so appreciative. And that really just opened an avenue of communication right then and there. But I think anecdotes like this also answer one of the other questions that we had about study abroad and how to really maximize the study abroad experience. And I think a lot of that is, don't stay in your bubble necessarily, because a lot of study abroad is, of course, instructor-led. And don't think that your way of thinking and experience is superior or inferior to what you're seeing around you. So let's maybe get to one question still. And this is a relatively broad question, but I think it allows us to really summarize a little bit of everything that's been said today. And that is actually, how has your experience as a language, in a cultural learning, being on the international stage and meeting, integrating, building relationships, building trust with people from abroad or even domestically with different backgrounds, how has that impacted your life? I know that's a very broad question. Who wants to give it a start?
I can give it a shot.
Please.
I think what it's made me way more daring and way more brave. Visiting other countries and cities, even in the United States, I do lots of actually traveling by myself, which is weird. You know, my mother would be the first one to be like, "You're going alone?" It's like, yeah. But that's usually when I learn the most, because I'm immersed and I don't really feel any limits. I don't like limitations. So when I'm in a country or in a city, even if it's United States or Europe or anywhere else that I've traveled, I just go. Like I see the things that I want to see, visit, places where I want to eat, food I want to try, museums I want to see to culturally educate myself. And I just go. And you're among the people. And I always try to pretend like I'm one of the people, right? Like I'm part of the community, I'm part of the culture, and I just, I blend in, or I try to blend in, if that's even possible. But I think that it's made me way braver, and kind of like sky's the limit, right? There is no limit, right? You just go. And so it's really made me, I don't know. I think lots of people see me, they're like, "Oh, I wish I could do that, but I don't have the courage," or, and I'm like, no, I'm going to do it because I want to do it. And it's worked great. I've met so many wonderful people along the way, so many things. And again, you just build connections with strangers. You meet somebody on the street and you end up talking to them for hours. And those are the kind of experiences you will never be able to get anywhere else, unless you really break out of your bubble and not live in fear, kind of. So that's been my experience.
Great.
Can I ask you, sorry, one question? Out of your bubble, did you force yourself to do that, or were you in a program that allowed you to be out of your bubble the entire time?
I think it's been a set of things, right? Coming to United States, I was only 11 or 12. So that forced me out of my bubble in itself, right? Mm-hmm. Just being kind of shoved into, I started school right away, like a month in the United States, and I spoke no English. And it was just a complete change in lifestyle and change in everything. So I think my whole life experience has kind of forced me to be out of that bubble. Mm-hmm. And again, teaching parents the way they raised me, how to be and not see myself as, kind of feel like they're I can't do this because of A, B, and C. It's never been that. It's just kind of, mm-hmm. If you want to do it, you can try, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. At least you tried, right? Mm-hmm. But I think I'm also an only child, so lots of the things that I had to do was by myself. So that also helped me. So I think my whole life trajectory in itself has been kind of, you can't be in the bubble. That's not a place where you're gonna grow. If you want to grow, you really have to leave your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, real quick, and Dasef, I wanted to kind of toss over to you, but there's one question that has actually popped up just a few minutes ago, and maybe you can kind of weave that into your response. Is if you are a high school kid excuse me, high school student, I shouldn't say kid, because high school students, they're adults. If you're a high school student and you're getting ready to go to college, you've been inspired by what you've heard today. Look at all the different kind of career tracks that you all have had. What advice could you give? What steps maybe can they take to do something as crazy and as wonderful as you have done? Dasef.
Yeah, so I think first things first, check out the websites of the schools you like to attend for college. When you go for a visit, stop by the departments, the language departments, and ask around, see what type of study abroad programs that they offer. I did the same thing for school. I actually started out wanting to do anthropology before I got into Spanish. And so I kind of learned what was offered at each university that I had in mind. So I think that's the first step. And I think once you take that step, you do those study abroads, what you're going to find is that possible about life expands. And so I have a good friend who family's from Guinea. He lives in Paris, and we text on WhatsApp like every week, send voice messages. We're always talking, and one of the things that we always discuss is that I think my imagination as an American of what is possible as far as lifestyle, as far as politics, as far as family is concerned, really expanded as I traveled around the world and saw how other people lived and thought. And so it made me a little bit more creative and gave me more that freedom that I was talking about earlier.
Excellent. Thank you. Kimberly, I'm going to let you have the last word here.
Sure. I agree with what a lot of people said around courage and moving forward. One thing I didn't want to lose sight of, because we are coming out of the pandemic, is that even if you study a language a couple of years and don't use it professionally for business all the time, that interest in connecting cross-cultural, there's other ways you can do that. So I have a Japanese conversation buddy. I do English as a second language cafes, because I'm still able to connect cross-culturally with others who are not like me and have different experiences, even if I'm not doing that in the context of my job. And so one of the things looking back in college is that it's easy to get into little cliques. I mean, it happens. You tend to gather with those like you. You can be really intentional about talking to that person from China, talking to that person from Greece, and just asking them questions and expanding your international circle. Because what you find when you're working and you decide to visit Europe is really great to call a friend and go visit them in Europe and not have to stay in a youth hostel or a hotel, and you have friends. So stay curious, don't be confined to what you learn in a program, in a class, and actually reach out and make connections with other of your classmates and peers as you're thinking about college as well.
Excellent. I honestly, this was like the perfect wrap up, I would say. So our time, unfortunately, is up. So this really is the conclusion actually to the IT and global business panel. I understand that we could have a hour-long conversation with each and every one of you just about your experience, but I'd like to thank the panel, of course. So also on behalf of CULTR, I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. Just as a reminder, the recordings of all the panel discussions this week will be made available after the event, and you should be getting an email with links so you can access them at any time. You will also be receiving a post-event survey, excuse me, which will be available right after the Zoom session is over. So please take a few minutes to complete that. The next World Languages Week discussion is the intercultural competence panel, which I think really intersects very, very well with what we were talking about today. And it will take place from 2 to 3 p.m. today, I believe, right? So please join that. Again, thank you very much. Thank you all my panelists. Thank you for the audience. This was really inspiring. This was fantastic. It has been an honor to moderate this panel. And y'all, please be safe, take care of yourselves, and stay curious. Thank you.